Hello and welcome to Business Finishing School. Let your business brain finish what your entrepreneurial heart started. Our catalyzing statement is a successful entrepreneur inside of every business. Enjoy this module. Hello and welcome to Module 45, Leadership and Legacy. Rick, we've had a lot of conversation around this subject of leadership, and there's varying types of leadership, but one thing I think everybody would agree with, and as you're listening to this, you've had to give consideration to this, is that people who leave a strong legacy and people who are successful in their careers are leaders. The idea of business leadership or business leaders, when the news is trying to characterize the titans of industry coming in for a meeting, they'll say, leaders of industry, leaders of business. The White House has called a meeting with the leaders of business. So leadership in business is kind of equated directly with the idea of legacy, people who are doing big things that are having an impact on the world. And it also has a relationship, I believe, to the current individual success of somebody being a leader, somebody who's vibrant, somebody who's got an aura, somebody who moves people, somebody who gets people to perform, somebody who has a vision that people follow. So leadership is a critical aspect of legacy and success in life. So with that, I thought it would be really good for us to explore the concept and constructs of leadership. There's more than one type of leadership for sure. To give examples, you might say, well, Donald Trump is a certain style of a leader, and Gandhi is a certain style of a leader. Well, they're very different types of leaders. Martin Luther King was a type of leader, and Malcolm X was a type of leader. Again, very, very different in their orientations, the way they approach things, etc. So I believe that being a leader is ubiquitous with legacy, as far as that they go hand in hand, and leadership is just a part of it. However, at the same time, I think that you have to decide and emerge in a way as to what type of leader do you want to be. So what is your perspective, Rick, on business leadership and its relationship to success and legacy?
Well, as I often do, I want to start with the definition of leadership. And leadership, as defined online in one venue, is the position or function of guiding or directing. The position or function of guiding or directing. Now, I'd like to define leadership first from what it's not. I have noticed that it is impossible to be a leader and a victim at the same time. Mm-hmm. So as you're listening to this, if you're saying, why me, or how could this happen, or they did this, or he said, or she said, or I can't believe this happened, that's the absence of leadership. Leadership, to me, in business and in life, is taking responsibility for everything that happens. Because I believe at the end of the day, every single thing that happens to you and to me in my life and you in your life, every problem you have, every opportunity you have, every relationship you have, every business you have, is a function of what's going on internally inside your brain. It's very rare that someone who has complete and total success all around them, everything they touch, it's very rare that that has nothing to do with that person's leadership ability. And the same is true from the opposite perspective. There are people that everything they touch seems to be negative or in the crapper, all their relationships are bad, they're sick all the time. That is an external manifestation of what's going on internally. So I would like you to think about, and as you go through the implementation guide, you'll see all the different areas of your life that you have influence, positive or negative. You belong to organizations, you belong to a family, both an immediate family and an extended family. You have businesses and business partnerships that are outside. The average person listening to this module, I would guess, because I know many of you, that you have more than 15 different pods of influence in which you could exert leadership. So what Patrick and I are going to teach you or illuminate for you in this module can be extended to many, many areas of your life. And I think where we need to go now, based on our preparation, is to talk about the nuance, Patrick, between Superman syndrome and leadership, because it is a nuanced balance.
Well, unfortunately, I believe what happens, some people feel that they're being leaders when they play Superman. And that's what we want to warn them against. Meaning, oh, I'm a leader when I can swoop in and save the day. Leadership really is more about leverage, right? So I would say that low-level thinkers, and I don't mean to insult anybody, but they just haven't seen past it, feel that their efficacy, their influence, their purpose is to deal with crisis and swoop in and save things and do everything for everybody, and being Superman is being a leader.
Well, you know about the old Chinese proverb that the best type of leadership is when someone comes in and leaves a situation and the people will remark, wow, we did this ourselves.
Right. And that's really it's really, I think, the orientation that if you want to leave a legacy, you can be a small time leader and be Superman. You can run a small business with a few employees and be Superman and have a small legacy. But if you want to have a big legacy, you need massive leverage. And if you want to have massive leverage, you have to be a leader that inspires other people to get work done, that empowers the troops, that makes people want to line up and perform at a higher level, that brings out the best in people as compared to coming in and doing things for them and basically making them kind of numb and making them feel like they're not needed or that they're performing low-level functionary type things.
When you talk about someone like Warren Buffett, when he invests in companies, one of his sayings is, I like to invest in companies that only a monkey could run, because sooner or later a monkey will be running it. And the point of that, and where I'm going to go with this is interesting, is that he believes that companies that have market leadership that they could be massive, they could be vast, but they have been created by a leader who put in place repetitive processes that can be carried about and carried on by a decent leader. They don't have to find Superman. Whereas most often, and this was a big problem in the 80s and 90s, a lot of CEOs, when it was time to retire, they were often tapped by the board to find their successor. And what they realized after many, many failures is most senior executives at large companies had Superman syndrome. Now, they weren't using these words, but let me continue. The CEO, who was hired by the board at one point, they ran through their tenure, let's say they were there for 10 or 15 years, and now it was time for them to find a successor. Well, many times, subconsciously, these leaders were picking somebody that they knew wouldn't be as good as them, because their ego was saying, listen, this ship can't run without me, and I really don't think I should leave, but let me find a successor. And so many times, how many times have we read in the press where a company went back and found a leader from the past and brought them back in to resurrect the ship?
Apple
did it with Steve Jobs. So from that perspective, was Steve Jobs a good leader when he was the only guy that could run Apple? Think about it.
Well, if we really look at that, his board kicked him out, the first time, but Steve Jobs was a great visionary. He was not necessarily a great leader in the sense of the way that he dealt with his employees and abused them, etc. But his strengths outweighed his shortcomings enough to make Apple what it is today. But and it's an interesting study in leadership. Jobs, one thing he did do effectively was to cause people to grow and bring out the best. Basically, they would come in and say, okay, here's the design work we've done. And he could look at it and say, it's pure shit, and I know you're capable of doing better. Now, in one respect, he browbeat him, and people maybe kind of shook in his quake. But at the other side of it, they basically aspired because of him. So it was the strength, so I would call Jobs a visionary leader. And this brings up the next point. What style of leader do you want to be? One of the things you just described, Rick, is what I call a process leader. Somebody who puts processes in place to assure the success of the company and that he has the right people in the positions. And he leaves a legacy because he's created a job or a company that can run on without having a bunch of brains in it. What you just described. Secondly, there is maybe a visionary leader who has this incredibly strong vision, that gets people to rally behind them and brings out the best in people and stretches them beyond what their imaginations might have been. One of the things I'd caution everybody who's listening about is you need to be, in my mind, you need to be your style of leader. If you try to adopt a style that's not naturally you, it won't work. You won't be authentic as a leader. I think leadership requires authenticity. So it's critical that you understand who you are authentically as an individual and go with that style. I mentioned earlier examples, but if you had, Jack Welch, I couldn't think of his name for a second, who was the leader of GE for all those years. Now he was seen as having a huge legacy, this incredible business leader that came in, and Neutron Jack, who changed everything. He had the book. So he was somebody who was a firm leader who basically take action type of person, et cetera, et cetera. And he would be a different type of a leader than somebody like we mentioned earlier, like a Gandhi, who didn't have an iron fist, was passive. His nature was more passive, but he used the strength of his passiveness to aspire people or inspire people to not be oppressed and to be peaceful in their rebuke of their oppression. But nonetheless, he was immensely effective. Gandhi couldn't try to be Jack Welch and succeed in what he was trying to do, and Jack Welch couldn't try to be Gandhi and succeed. They're both great leaders, just different kinds of leaders.
But one thing you're pointing out, Patrick, which I want the listeners to be aware of, is both of those leaders, although they had different styles, they both left an amazing legacy.
That's exactly right.
What we don't want you to do is hear that there's different styles where I know many, many inspirational leaders that are great leaders, but the day that they walk out of their business or when they're not there, their employees don't know what to do. And so it's very important that not only do you find the style of leadership, but you put in place the systems so that you have a legacy long after you're gone. And I think the absolute best example of this, incredibly mature leadership that has changed the world forever, and that's our founding fathers. They had immense foresight. They were talking about legacy from the beginning. And this went on for 20 years. I am in the middle of a biography on Thomas Jefferson. And since he was a teenager, he would talk about leaving a legacy, creating a country that would withstand the political winds and forces for generations.
Talk a little bit about his evolution, though, and how he became that great leader. Like, the habits and things that he put in place in his evolution as a human being that led him there.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on Thomas Jefferson. I only know what I've read so far. But one of the things that was interesting about Thomas Jefferson, he was so far ahead of his time. He sought out these great minds, and he had long philosophical debates with them. He would invite himself to their homes. He would spend 3 or 4 hours, and he would talk philosophy for years and years and years. And word got around that there was this incredibly motivated young kid who wanted to have dinner with famous people. And he had thousands of these dinners over the course of like a 10 or 15 year period. And think about how far reaching that is. Think about how advanced that is. Think about how, as a teenager, he's thinking about this. How many kids when they're 18, 19, 20, 25, they are seeking the best minds in the world so they could have philosophical debates because they're trying to create a country. It's crazy. And then at the age of 33, he penned the Declaration of Independence pretty much by himself. because everybody said the only person that's capable of doing this is Thomas Jefferson at 33. Now keep in mind, this was a time when Benjamin Franklin was around and was in his 70s, I believe, and even Benjamin Franklin couldn't compete with the brain of Thomas Jefferson. Another thing that was interesting about Thomas Jefferson is he had so many varied interests, from being a scientist and an architect and a farmer. Uh, he knew how to blend plants together to create new strains. He also exercised, as he reports, 2 hours every day.
Wow.
He knew way back then that 2 hours of exercise a day was better for the mind, and now there's all kinds of research about how your brain shrinks less if you exercise daily. And in fact, there's some reports that are saying that your brain stops shrinking, because one of the things that is known in science is that as you age, your brain shrinks. But if you exercise, your brain either stays the same, and in some cases it grows. So that's an interesting thing that Thomas Jefferson may have read or known that, because he was a fierce exerciser. And in fact, it was known that in the middle of the day he could be in an important meeting and he'd leave to get his 2 hours of exercise in, as the book reports. So he was demonstrating qualities of leadership. And what are they? He wanted to test his philosophical beliefs. He often would find people that had opposite philosophical beliefs to him. And he constantly reformulated. And the vision that's coming to my mind is Michelangelo, when he created David. He was chipping away and testing hypotheses and taking time away and coming back and changing and peeling away. And I see Thomas Jefferson in the same light. So it's a great book. Any book that you read about Thomas Jefferson is good. I believe without Thomas Jefferson and without the founding fathers, certainly, there would be no United States of America. And that absolutely massive explosion of intellectual energy that's created this country. And that started with leadership, and that's why I believe this is one of the most important topics for you to study, get better at, and express yourself as.
So now that we've kind of talked about there's varying styles of leadership, the way that people approach it, and that you should be authentic in the style that you approach your leadership, let's talk about some of the common traits of leadership. All great leaders have purpose. They have clarity of purpose. All great leaders have vision. They have a strong vision. They may have different capacities to communicate it, but it's there. All great leaders also have ambition. They want to make something happen in the world. They want to participate in making greatness in the world. That's a part of what leadership is. They also do two things with their purpose and their vision. They develop, in other words, they want to develop it, grow it, expand it, but they also defend it. For example, you might say that with our forefathers, perfect example, amazing vision for a new way that human beings can exist in the world and how they should exist. And they wanted to develop a country where there were unalienable rights for these human beings that were explicitly stated. And at the same time, call it liberty as a general thing. At the same time, they want to defend that liberty. So they have this precious purpose and vision that they have. They want to put it into the world, but they are simultaneously developers and defenders of that. So and you need clarity around your vision, around your purpose, to know what it is that you are defending. What do you stand for, in essence? So the parallel for you, looking at your business, what does your business exist for? You want to, if you're a business leader, you want to develop that business, and simultaneously, you want to fiercely defend your business and what it stands for.
And to continue with that list, Patrick, I agree with you 100%. And we were talking about all the qualities of leadership that we want you to think about. This is the first module, I believe, that we're not going to specifically tell you what you need to do. We want you to think about leadership and study it on your own. There's 1,000 ways that you can study leadership. There's thousands of books on the topic. But to add to the list that Patrick was talking about was leaders have energy. They manage their energy. They keep their energy up. It's very hard if you can imagine a difficult situation that you're going through and then there's a leader at the helm and they have no energy. It just wouldn't work. It's an oxymoron. And the last word on the list that I have is responsibility. Leaders take responsibility. They take responsibility for outcomes. They take responsibility for situations, good and bad. They take responsibility. They have a the buck stops here mentality. Now we're talking about leaders that leave a legacy. I have been flabbergasted by some of our political leaders who seem to point fingers, pass the buck, and they don't realize that taking responsibility shows so well. I mean, it's an amazing trait to simply take responsibility. Taking responsibility doesn't mean that it was my fault. It means I'm going to take responsibility and fix it. I've been in many situations in my business where an employee did something really wrong, and I call the client myself and say, look, I take responsibility for handling this. I don't say this person did it or that person did it. I just simply take responsibility. And taking responsibility is powerful. It sends a message of leadership as strong as any other. So there you have some attributes of leaders, and obviously there's many, many more. I've got a couple of quotes I want to share with you that may spur your thinking, and in the implementation guide, will offer you an opportunity to find leadership attributes that you want to possess. Here's my first quote by Colin Powell, of all people. Great leaders are almost always great simplifiers who can cut through argument, debate, and doubt to offer a solution everybody can understand. And oftentimes we approach leadership from the opposite perspective, that the leadership has that the leader has all the answers, that they're smarter than everybody else. And what I've noticed in my business is the best leaders are the ones that hire people smarter than them, which is very, very interesting. Here's another one by Max Lucado. A person who wants to lead the orchestra must turn their back on the crowd. And leadership very often is going against popular wisdom or popular culture or popular anything. You have to be willing to stand on your convictions.
There are so many great quotes on leadership out there. One that I'd like to share that I think is a great quote on leadership that I relate to, at least personally, is from Martin Luther King Jr. And he said, "A genuine leader is not a searcher for consensus, but a molder of consensus." And I think that's really kind of the difference between leadership in a free society versus a communistic type of a leadership where you're not it's wanting to impose your will, your vision, your purpose in life, and lead people to that, as compared to saying, "Oh, well, what do you guys want to do? What do you think is the right thing to do? How would you like to play this game?" No, you stand up, and through the force of your vision and your purpose, you mold the consensus to aspire behind you. That's what real leadership is. So, and you can scale this. I mean, obviously that happens in a small, doctor's office. It can happen in a big Fortune 500 company. I think in a sense that the scale of it might change, but I think the attributes are the same. And I think that when you show up to lead with the intention to lead, and it doesn't mean that it has to be like you're forcing people. That it doesn't have to be that way. Let me say this because I think it's important. I'm going to say two things that I think would be really helpful here. Number one, you don't have to have a particular personality style to be a leader. That's why I'm saying you have to do it your way. Many people falsely think that, only drivers can become, great leaders or leaders that leave a legacy. An amiable can't do that. An analytical doesn't do that. the other varying personality styles, whatever personality style guidebook you use, that it's the driver personality or the Enneagram 8 or 3 or what have you, that those are the leaders, and amiables have to be the followers. I've seen some amiables who are great leaders. It's a matter they have a different style of leading, but they have such a strength of purpose that they can lead in the style of who they are. So don't be under the false impression that if you are of a personality style that is not a driver, that you can't lead. Second, and I'll tell a little bit of a story here that I think is helpful. I was in the UK some years ago, and I had gone there because there was some political upheavals going on within the chiropractic industry, which is the industry that I am in mostly. And it was a pretty big battle. So I showed up to help lead the charge in overcoming some oppressive political forces that were looking to do things to chiropractors in the United Kingdom that would be that have been really bad against our values. And I remember, and I've been there several times, and I'd had offices in London that I kept for 4 years, and we ran programs there and everything else. And I'd showed up, and I remember being in front of the group and kind of ranting and raving a little bit and trying to get them shook and motivated to take the action that needed to happen. Which, incidentally, I'm very proud of the group because they did, and they were effective. But I remember at one point I got this kind of innate flash, this sense that I need to say something to this group. And here's what I said. You might be looking at me thinking, well, I can do this because I get up in front of audiences and I speak and I do those. I said, let me tell you something about myself. I am an introvert. I'm not an extroverted personality. I said, I just flew over here for almost 8 hours on a plane with a seatmate right next to me. I didn't say a word to the person the whole flight. I didn't say one word to the person the whole flight. Now, if he had said something to me, I could be responsive and I'll engage in a conversation. I said, I'm the guy you never want to get in the elevator with because it's very uncomfortable. I get in the elevator, I'm looking at the lights, I'm looking down, but I'm awkward. I don't naturally just get in the elevator and talk to people and have this natural bubbliness about me. And people are mistakenly characterize me as being this extroverted, extremely expressive individual, which by nature, by my default nature, I'm not. So then how can I get up in front of groups as big as 8,000 people and give these fiery talks that I give? The answer is because I have a purpose and I have a vision and I have values that drive me to get up and express them because it's important. I don't do it other than that as just a natural thing. So it's the purpose first, and then my leadership comes and follows that. So, why am I telling that story? Because I got to tell you, especially in the UK, where they're a little bit more reserved, maybe by nature, than people in America. I can't tell you how many people, when I just happen to mention it at the end of the talk, come up to me and say, "Thank you so much for saying that." I always saw myself as an introvert, and I always looked at people like you and felt like I can't do that. And now I recognize I can do that because I do agree. I have the same passion about these issues that you do, but I felt like I'm not the type of person that speaks out. Now I recognize that neither were you by nature. And so that I think, and I'm saying this to you now because you might be an introvert. You might be somebody who maybe doesn't perceive themselves as having leadership qualities because you're somewhat introverted in your personality. Ultimately, what I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that if your purpose is strong and your desire is to lead, it doesn't matter what your personality style is.
And Patrick, that is a perfect story and a perfect segue into our next section of this audio. And that is the fine work of Jim Collins, who wrote a book called Good to Great and spent years and years on researching leadership. And he basically broke leaders into 5 categories, level 1 through level 5. And a level 1 leader, where a lot of leaders reside, he describes as a highly capable individual. They make productive contributions through talent, knowledge, skill, and good work habits. And that's fine. A lot of people are there, millions of people, in fact. And then you've got the level two leader, which is described as a contributing team member, further described as they contribute individual capabilities to the achievement of group objectives. They work effectively with others and in group settings. Level three, competent manager, organizes people and resources toward effective and efficient pursuit of predetermined objectives. And level four, he describes, which I'm going to read, uh, as the most common leader. When you think about big companies, and you think about Jack Welch, and you think about some of the names that we throw around, he would say are in the level four category, which is the effective leader, catalyzes commitment to and vigorous pursuit of a clear and compelling vision, stimulating higher performance standards. And Jack Welch fits there, no question about it. I've had the opportunity to meet Jack Welch, and he has a massive personality, huge amount of ego there, my way or the highway type of leader, and that can be effective, and it certainly was effective for him. Arguably, he was described as one of the most effective leaders ever, but he was extremely dominant. He was described to me by Tony Blanche, who worked for him, who's a very close friend of mine, as always screaming, always yelling, demanding more, putting people down. But at the end of the day, he produced results. And that's effective leader, level four. But now we get into what you touched on, which is the level five leader. And this gets interesting. Here's how Jim Collins, with a full team of people doing research on companies that produced results and produced other leaders, who was at the helm? And what they were looking for were companies that continued to thrive after the leader moved on. And here's how we describe the level five leader. Builds enduring greatness through a paradoxical blend of personal humility and professional will. And oftentimes when these leaders were invited to be the leader of the company, there's a great story about Gillette, where they tapped this executive. He had been there for 30 years. He didn't talk much. He was very quiet, but he had an unbelievable will. He was very humble. He was very quiet. And when they asked him, we want you to be the CEO of the company, he said, not me. Why me? Why would you want me? And he ended up leading the company over a 20-year period through unbelievable growth, more growth than the company had ever had and will ever have, because he was so willful and determined, yet at the same time, and paradoxically, as Jim Collins reports, humble. In other words, he was an introvert. And most of the leaders that they found that led these companies through enduring greatness were, in fact, introverts. So we're telling you this story, and I believe I've been around Patrick enough to know that he is an introvert. And ironically, you might think this is kind of crazy, but I'm also an introvert. I recently read a book on Dean Martin, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, they didn't get along because Dean Martin didn't talk. He literally didn't talk. He was so terrified of people. He would sit in his hotel room and watch TV all day, and then he'd have to amp himself up to get on stage. And what I've learned about a lot of people that you see in the public eye that are on stage, singers, actors, dancers, they're very, very, very shy. I went to college with one in particular who recently passed away, James Gandolfini, and the guy was so painfully shy that when you went up to him, he would just giggle. And he obviously went on to fame as the actor in The Sopranos. And you would never know that about him. And if you Google him and see him in interviews, he's painfully shy. Now, I wouldn't say that James Gandolfini is an example of leadership. That's not the point I was making. The point I was making, however, is do not discount your leadership ability because you're an introvert. Jim Collins, if you read Good to Great, which will be in your implementation guide in the reference section at the end, he has demonstrated over and over and over and over again that companies that produce the best results have introverted in some cases shy, humble, and but effective leaders.
I am an admirer of Jim Collins' work, and I really believe that those 5 levels of leadership are profound. So I'm really glad you brought those in. I think in the home stretch here is a couple of recommendations. Ultimately, I think you have to start with the question, what is your premise about leadership? We've talked about it in many different ways. We set out a lot of premises here. I think we've given you enough stimulation. Now the question is, what is your premise? How do you view leadership? And I'll give you a couple of examples just so you might know what I mean. Andy Grove, the famous CEO of Intel. I mean, he's not anymore, but he grew Intel and had a great succession plan, quite frankly. But Andy Grove used to say that he felt that a little paranoia was always a good thing for a leader to have. To be a little bit paranoid about things might go bad, things could go wrong, etc. Rick, you're a different style leader than that. You have a different premise. You are into what we call pronoia. And we've talked about this in our accountability group, where you look at the universe conspiring for you. That setbacks are something that's supposed to push you in the right direction. My caveat on that is that pronoia applies if you're on purpose, then the right things happen. If you're not, then bad things can happen. So ultimately, you have to decide kind of what are your premises about leadership, the approach to leadership, the type of leadership, etc. Lay out those premises. One thing that might help you is to clarify those premises for yourself is to make a list of leaders that you admire. Sit down with literally a blank sheet of paper on your keyboard or with a pen and paper and start writing a list. From history, they don't have to necessarily be alive. They can be current leaders, they can be leaders from the past, but write down a name. Who are the people that I admire most? Write down their names, and then right next to those names, why? What did I admire about them? John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Jack Welch, any of the leaders that you might admire, make them your own. Why did you admire? What presidents maybe that did you admire? And at the same time, the converse of this could be instructive. What leaders don't you like? What people from history, and it's easy to shoot at politicians, I don't like this particular leader and here is why. So you can see what you gravitate toward and what you want to move away from. And by objectifying this or having it more explicit in your mind, you can start to shape your own leadership and then therefore shape your destiny, and ultimately this will shape your legacy.
I want to add an additional exercise for you to do as well, and those are great, Patrick. All of this is in your implementation guide as always. I would like you to look out into your life as it stands today and look at all of the different organizations that you're a part of, from your family to potentially political organizations to your company to nonprofits, and decide, number one, where do you need to take a stronger leadership stand? And number two, of the ones that you're involved in, which ones do you need to remove from your life? I have to tell you that as I grow as a human being and as a business leader, I took a long, hard look at my life. And very recently, I decided to resign from an organization that I created. It's a nonprofit. I founded it and built it, and it's 10 years old. And just before its 10-year anniversary, I made the decision quietly. I just told the board, I said, I feel like my work is done here and I want to move on. And they said, well, do you want to make a video? Do you want to announce anything? I said, no, I'm proud of the organization as it is. I'm just moving on. It was so hard for people to appreciate and respect what I was saying, but that's not the important part. The important part is, I think part of my leadership development is to move on and away from organizations that no longer fit my current reality. And my current reality is I want to continue to grow my leadership abilities. I want to be in touch with and involved with and grow very large things. And so that's my starting point now. So I think many of you, because I've been through this myself, Many of you are not exerting leadership in organizations that you should be, and you are exerting leadership in organizations that you shouldn't be. So you need to live a life aligned with your purpose, aligned with your values, aligned with your current objectives. And that is the last exercise for this module on leadership. Patrick, I've really enjoyed this one with you.
Yeah, it's a great one.
Thank you all for listening, and enjoy your leadership journey.
Let your business brain finish what your entrepreneurial heart started.